Sergeant, you want some of this new Cool Whip topping?
Later, Pyle. I'm getting in shape in case our Cool Whip contest winner's a girl. Anybody can win a trip to Hollywood and a guest appearance on the show.
For 5 seasons in the 1960s, it was the sound of American television. First, the booming, exasperated roar of a Marine Corps sergeant, then the gentle, dopey reply of his most hopeless recruit. Pyle. Shazam. It was a comedic clash of titans, a formula that was pure gold, rocketing Gomer Pyle, U.S.M.C. to the top of the ratings and cementing its place in the pantheon of classic TV. On screen, Gunnery Sergeant Vince Carter and Private Gomer Pyle were an inseparable duo. Their friction was the engine of the show, a perfectly choreographed dance of frustration and innocence that made millions laugh every week. The public saw 2 actors with flawless chemistry, the perfect odd couple who, surely, must have been the best of friends when the cameras stopped rolling. That was the myth. That was the magic. And for a lot of people, that's where the story ended. For millions, they were the most beloved duo on television. Sergeant Carter and Gomer Pyle. Their on-screen conflict was comedy gold. The vein-popping anger from the sergeant, the wide-eyed golly from the private. But for decades, rumors have persisted that behind all the smiles, the tension was real. Whispers from the set and stories from insiders all pointed to the idea that the man who played Sergeant Carter, the brilliant and complex Frank Sutton, was living a very different reality from the one audiences tuned in for every week. Now, by piecing together public interviews, archival records, and the actor's own words, the truth of what Frank Sutton really felt about his co-star Jim Nabors and the show that made him famous can finally be understood. It's a story of ambition, frustration, and profound artistic sacrifice. It's a story that's far more complex, and a lot more human, than you remember. To get the full picture, you first have to understand just how huge this show was. When Gomer Pyle, U.S.M.C. premiered on September 25, 1964, it was an instant phenomenon. As a spin-off from the already beloved Andy Griffith Show, the series took a simple fish-out-of-water concept and turned it into a cultural touchstone. The premise was simple. Gomer Pyle, a kind-hearted but hopelessly naive gas station attendant from Mayberry, joins the Marines. There, he falls under the command of Gunnery Sergeant Vince Carter, a man whose entire world is built on discipline, order, and bellowing. The show never dropped below 10th in the Nielsen ratings during its entire 5-year run. At its peak, it was the second most-watched program in America. In an era of massive social upheaval, with the Vietnam War escalating, Gomer Pyle was a port in the storm. It was comfort food television, predictable, funny, and famously, it never once mentioned the real-world war, existing in a bubble of barracks hijinks and good-natured fun. It was pure escapism. The heart of that escapism was the relationship between Carter and Pyle. Frank Sutton's performance as Carter was a masterclass in comedic rage. He was a tightly coiled spring of fury, his face a canvas of disbelief and indignation. His bug-eyed glares and slow burns that would erupt into a volcanic roar, it was theatrical perfection. He could have easily been a one-note bully, but Sutton gave him more. Beneath all the shouting, audiences saw glimpses of begrudging affection, a paternal frustration that suggested he cared about this bumbling private more than he'd ever admit. Sutton himself even said in an interview that deep down, Carter was a gentle, warm-hearted person. Opposite him was Jim Nabors as Gomer. With his Alabama charm and almost unbelievable innocence, Nabors was the perfect foil. Gomer wasn't mean-spirited, he was just Gomer. He took everything literally, operated with a guileless sincerity, and drove his sergeant to the brink of madness through sheer, unrelenting goodness. The chemistry between them was undeniable. It was the irresistible force meeting the immovable object, and the comedic explosions were legendary. To the American public, Frank Sutton was Sergeant Carter, and Jim Nabors was Gomer Pyle. They were a package deal, an iconic duo like Laurel and Hardy or Abbott and Costello. Fan magazines were filled with pictures of them laughing on set, their arms around each other. They were the picture of harmony. But as the show's popularity soared, a different story was taking shape behind the closed doors of the studio, a story of 2 men who couldn't have been more different, locked together in a golden cage of TV superstardom. Hollywood in the 1960s was a town built on whispers. While the public got the polished image from the studios, the real story circulated among the cast and crew. And on the set of one of television's happiest shows, the whispers were about a growing divide. The big question, the one that's fueled speculation for over 50 years, was simple: did Frank Sutton secretly resent Jim Nabors? The rumors weren't born from a single, dramatic blow-up, but from a slow build-up of observations. Crew members talked. They saw two men who shared a workspace, not a friendship. When the director yelled cut, Sutton and Nabors often retreated to their separate worlds. Nabors, friendly and outgoing, would chat with the crew or work on his booming singing career. Sutton, who was more reserved and intellectual, would often be in his dressing room, reading a book or meticulously going over his lines. Their on-set relationship was described by everyone as strictly professional. They respected each other's talent, but their lives just didn't intersect beyond the script. This professional distance is where the rumors of a feud started. Why weren't they closer? Why didn't that on-screen camaraderie translate to real life? The Hollywood gossip mill hates a vacuum. If there wasn't a visible friendship, there must be a secret animosity. A narrative began to form. Sutton, the serious, classically trained actor, must look down on Nabors, the nightclub singer who just stumbled into fame with a goofy catchphrase. Adding fuel to the fire were stories about how differently they approached the work. Co-star Ronnie Shell, who played Duke Slater, noted that Sutton wasn't a natural, improvisational comedian. He was a technician. His comedy came from discipline and precision. In a 1969 interview, Sutton explained his method, saying he relied on memorization and timing, not ad-libbing. He was a craftsman who took all of it, even the slapstick, with profound seriousness. Nabors, on the other hand, was seen as more relaxed, his talent more innate. His focus was also increasingly divided. As Gomer Pyle took off, Jim Nabors the singer was becoming just as famous as Jim Nabors the actor. His albums were selling millions. He was a frequent guest on variety shows, where he would stun audiences with his powerful baritone voice. Insiders began to whisper that Sutton felt the show was suffering from this divided attention. One producer later recalled that Sutton had a silent temper. You knew he was angry when he just stopped talking. He prided himself on discipline and expected it from everyone. The idea that the show's lead might be distracted would have clashed with his entire professional ethos. The tension wasn't in loud arguments, but in long silences and a professional frustration you could feel. The stage was set for a classic Hollywood drama, two co-stars, bound by a hit show, but with completely different ambitions and work ethics. To really understand where it all came from, you have to look at the two separate worlds these men came from. The story of the tension on the Gomer Pyle set is really the story of two fundamentally different men, whose paths to stardom couldn't have been more divergent. It was a collision of old-school discipline and newfound fame, of hard-earned craft and seemingly effortless charisma. Frank Spencer Sutton was born on October 23, 1923, in Clarksville, Tennessee. He was an intelligent, studious kid whose passion for acting ignited early. He took his first role in a local play at age 9 and was the star of his high school drama club. This wasn't a whim, it was a calling. His wife, Toby Igler, would later recall first seeing him at Columbia University reading a monologue from Hamlet, and being blown away by his power and seriousness. But before he could chase that dream, the world went to war. Frank Sutton answered the call. He actually tried to join the Marine Corps first, the same service he'd one day make famous, but was medically rejected for being colorblind. So, he enlisted in the U.S. Army in 1943. He served in the South Pacific, a world away from Hollywood. His service was harrowing. Military records and biographical accounts confirm he participated in as many as 14 assault landings in brutal campaigns like Leyte and Luzon. He was a man who had seen the real face of combat, a stark contrast to the sanitized, comedic version of military life he would later portray, after being honorably discharged. Sutton dedicated himself to his craft. He enrolled at New York's prestigious Columbia University, studying drama, and graduating with honors. He built his early career on the stage and in the gritty world of early television, carving out a niche playing intense, often villainous characters. He once reflected on this period: until 5 years ago, the closest I came to comedy was being strapped into an electric chair as a convicted killer or being shot by the FBI. His roles were so menacing that people would sometimes hiss at him on the street. He appeared in acclaimed films like the Oscar-winning Marty and the stark drama Town Without Pity. He was a regular face on serious shows like Naked City, The Untouchables, and The Twilight Zone. Frank Sutton was the definition of a working actor, a respected craftsman who had paid his dues. He was an intellectual with a personal library of nearly 3,000 books, a dedicated family man, married to Toby from 1949 until his death. He was serious, disciplined, and had fought for every inch of his career. James Thurston Neighbors, born in Sylacauga, Alabama, on June 12, 1930, had zero ambition to be a TV star. His passion was singing. After college, he moved to LA to work as a film cutter at NBC. At night, he performed a cabaret act at a popular Santa Monica nightclub. His act was unique. He'd tell stories as a goofy Southerner, and then shock the audience by revealing a magnificent, operatic baritone voice. It was during one of those shows that he was discovered by Andy Griffith. Griffith was captivated and offered him a one-episode role on The Andy Griffith Show as a simple-minded gas station attendant named Gomer Pyle. The episode aired in 1962, and the character was an immediate sensation. That one-episode gig turned into a recurring role that spanned 23 episodes. The public fell in love with Gomer. His innocence and his catchphrases, "Shazam, golly," were infectious. The response was so overwhelming that by 1964, the network decided Gomer was popular enough for his own show. The idea was hatched to have him enlist in the Marines, and the spin-off was born. Jim Neighbors' rise was meteoric. It looked completely effortless from the outside. He wasn't a trained actor from Columbia. He was a nightclub singer who had been plucked from obscurity and handed one of the biggest shows in the country. His fame wasn't a long, hard climb, it was a sudden, explosive ascent, and right there is the foundational crack that would define the dynamic on set. On one side, you have Frank Sutton, the war veteran, the Ivy League graduate, the serious dramatic actor who spent 2 decades playing killers. On the other, you have Jim Neighbors, the affable singer whose natural charm and a single, simple character made him an overnight superstar. Sutton's career was a testament to hard work. Neighbors' career seemed like a miracle. This fundamental imbalance was ripe for misunderstanding and quiet frustration. As Gomer Pyle settled in as a CBS cornerstone, the differences between its two stars started to show up in their daily work. The set, which was light-hearted in the early days, slowly became more transactional. It became a job. And for Frank Sutton, that job came with a growing sense of artistic confinement that was the real source of the tension. The biggest point of friction was Sutton's struggle with being typecast. He was, by training and temperament, a dramatic actor. He'd built a career on nuance and intensity, only to find global fame playing a perpetually angry, one-dimensional sergeant. The role of Sergeant Carter, while a gift in terms of fame and financial security, felt like a creative straitjacket. This frustration started to bubble up in his interactions with the show's producers and writers. According to reports from the time, Sutton frequently pushed for more depth in his character. He wanted Sergeant Carter to evolve, to show moments of vulnerability, to be more than just a screaming caricature. He felt Carter was a good man at heart and deserved to show it. But the network had a hit formula: Gomer's innocence foils Carter's anger. Comedy ensues. It was simple, it worked, and they were terrified to mess with it. Any attempt by Sutton to add complexity was often shut down. The network wanted the Shazam, not Shakespeare. This put Sutton in a state of quiet professional isolation. He was known for his incredible work ethic, staying late to help guest actors with their lines and constantly trying to improve scripts. His co-star Ronnie Shell remembered him as a great actor, but one who was doing the show for the money and was never entirely comfortable in the world of broad comedy. While others saw the show as light entertainment, for Sutton, it was his art, and he felt it was being stifled. His frustration wasn't really directed at Jim Nabors personally, but at the system Nabors represented. Nabors was the star, and the show revolved around his character's unchanging innocence. For Carter to grow, Gomer would have to grow, and that was never going to happen. The show depended on Gomer staying the same. Sutton was, in essence, trapped by his co-star's character. This led to a palpable cooling of the atmosphere. The easy camaraderie of the first season gave way to a more rigid professionalism. A producer noted that Sutton's silent temper was a powerful force. His disapproval wasn't loud, it was a quiet intensity that let everyone know he was unhappy with a scene or a script. As Nabors' singing career exploded, leading to more time away and a perceived split in his focus, Sutton's frustration grew. He felt the show, and his own performance, deserved everyone's full commitment. The public, of course, saw none of this. They saw Sergeant Carter getting a pie in the face and roared with laughter. They didn't see the classically trained actor behind the uniform, a man who survived real battles only to find himself in a creative war he couldn't win. He was becoming a victim of his own success. The more the world loved Sergeant Carter, the more Frank Sutton felt his identity as a serious artist slipping away. For years, Frank Sutton upheld a professional code of silence. In the few interviews he gave, he was always gracious, always praising the show that made him a star. He spoke of his respect for the Marine Corps and his colleagues. But he rarely, if ever, talked about his own frustrations. This public quiet allowed the rumors to fester for decades. Did he hate Jim Nabors? Was he bitter? The idea of a single, long-lost interview where Sutton finally let it all out is pure myth. The truth of his feelings emerged not in one dramatic moment, but through a collection of statements, accounts from friends and colleagues, and by reading between the lines of his professional choices. When you assemble all the pieces, a clear and consistent picture emerges. It is not a picture of personal hatred, but of profound professional disappointment. A key insight comes from a 1969 interview where he discussed his hope that he was nearing the point where I'm actually creating my own style of comedy, and that a day would come when he wouldn't have to depend solely on writers. This was a clear, if diplomatic, way of expressing his artistic unease. He didn't want to just be a vessel for punchlines, he wanted to be a creator. The ultimate conclusion from all the evidence is this: the relationship with Nabors was never close because it couldn't be. They were just two different men on two different paths. As one person close to the production put it, they worked differently and they thought differently. There was professional respect, but it was never easy. The core of the issue wasn't personal animosity, but a fundamental clash of artistic sensibilities. Sutton had spent a lifetime building a reputation as a versatile, serious actor. Now, he was world famous for yelling. The more famous Sergeant Carter became, the more invisible Frank Sutton felt. He felt boxed in. The role that should have been the peak of his career had become a gilded cage. Every script that came his way was for another shouting authority figure, another version of Sergeant Carter. The industry, and the public, seemed unable to see him as anything else. And that's the great irony of his career. His performance as Sergeant Carter was so iconic, so utterly believable, that he completely merged with the character. He had simply done his job too well. The true tension on set wasn't a petty celebrity feud. It was something far more poignant, the internal struggle of a dedicated artist wrestling with the price of fame. He wasn't angry at Jim Nabors, the man. He was frustrated by what the phenomenon of Gomer Pyle had done to his career and his artistic identity. The silence he kept for so long wasn't hiding a secret hatred, it was masking a quiet, professional heartbreak. In 1969, after 5 seasons, Jim Nabors decided to walk away from Gomer Pyle, U.S.M.C. He wanted to pursue his own variety show and focus more on singing. For Frank Sutton, it was a moment of both crisis and opportunity. The show that had defined and confined his career was over. What was next? Immediately, Nabors launched the Jim Nabors Hour. In an act that speaks volumes about the true nature of their relationship, Nabors showed a powerful sense of professional loyalty. He brought Frank Sutton along as a regular performer, often appearing in comedy sketches with him and fellow Gomer Pyle alum Ronnie Shell. This move directly contradicts any narrative of a bitter feud. Whatever their differences, there was a foundation of mutual respect. Neighbors knew how much Sutton contributed to their success and didn't cast him aside. The Jim Neighbors Hour lasted for 2 seasons before it was cancelled in 1971, a casualty of CBS's infamous Rural Purge, which axed many popular country-themed shows. For Sutton, this meant he was truly on his own for the first time in nearly a decade, no longer tied to the Gomer Pyle universe, but the ghost of Sergeant Carter was impossible to escape. He was one of the most recognizable faces in America, but as Vince Carter, not Frank Sutton. The offers that came in were overwhelmingly for similar roles, gruff, loud, military types. It was the typecasting he had feared, come to life. He sought out different work, returning to his first love, the theater. He became a fixture in dinner theater, touring the country in plays that let him stretch his acting muscles in ways television would not. He was once again Frank Sutton, the actor, not just Sergeant Carter, the icon. But it was a world away from the primetime spotlight. His legacy is complicated. On one hand, he created one of the most enduring characters in television history. His comedic timing and his ability to project warmth beneath a crusty exterior were brilliant. Sergeant Carter is a masterwork. On the other hand, that very success cost him the diverse career he craved. He was a classically trained, powerful actor who is remembered mostly for yelling at a country bumpkin. The final, tragic chapter of his story came on June 28, 1974. While getting ready for a performance of the comedy Love at a dinner theater in Louisiana, Frank Sutton suffered a massive heart attack. He passed away in his dressing room, a working actor right to the very end. He was only 50 years old. His untimely death robbed him of the chance to ever fully step out of Sergeant Carter's shadow. Perhaps with more time, he would have found that one great dramatic role that would have redefined him. We'll never know. What remains is the story of a man who gave everything to his craft. He was a dedicated professional, a decorated veteran, and a brilliant performer who was perhaps a victim of his own immense talent. His frustration wasn't with his co-star, but with an industry that loves to put people in boxes, and with an audience that loved his character so much, they could never let him be anyone else. Frank Sutton's story is a powerful reminder that behind the characters we love are complex human beings with their own dreams and disappointments. The so-called feud on the set of Gomer Pyle wasn't a battle between two men, but one man's quiet battle with his own legacy. So, the next time you watch an old rerun and hear Sergeant Carter's iconic roar, listen a little closer. Behind the laughter, you might just hear the echo of a great actor, a serious artist who poured his soul into a role that made him immortal, even as it kept him from being fully seen. Did this story change your perspective on Sergeant Carter or the show? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed this look behind the scenes of a TV classic, make sure to subscribe for more stories about the legends of Hollywood.